Malongi avinun ta lofalava. My name is Henrietta McNeill, and I'm a research fellow here at the Department of Pacific Affairs. The topic that we're talking about today, Pacific Criminology, is a challenge to traditional criminology, to developing an alternative vision. Like many criminal justice structures, which are a legacy of colonisation, criminology has been challenged as a discipline rooted in colonial frameworks, focusing on carcerality and purportedly inherent badness. But we know that in the Pacific, it is communities and societies that achieve results. And like we heard this morning from keynote speaker, Honourable Fiona Matbob, when she described when a village uses governance structures rooted in tradition and relationality, then crime reduces. That's what we want to talk about today, about relational structures of order and looking to the future of managing crime in a locally led manner. I want to note that a Pacific criminology is definitely not a new concept. It was first called for by John Braithwaite in 2013, which was built upon by Professor Sinclair Dinnen, Miranda Forsyth and Fiona Hukula in 2019, who discussed a Pacific public criminology. Then last year, a number of us attended the Pacific Criminology Symposium in Wellington, hosted by Ngisa Moses-Faliolo and Miranda Forsyth, out of which developed both a Pacific Criminology thematic group as part of the Australia-New Zealand Society of Criminology, and only this week, hot off the press and available at this QR code, please all get your phones out, a special issue delving into Pacific criminology, which I'm really pleased to be a part of. And on behalf of the authors, I'd like to thank both the editors and in particular Felicity Tapper, who did an outstanding job of editing. In this special issue, Ngisa and Miranda, so everyone should be reading this. In this special issue, Ngisa and Miranda describe Pacific criminology as an alternative vision, a way of seeing, feeling and understanding harm, crime and punishment, as well as peace, love and healing through the worldview of Pacific peoples. It involves understanding and applying Pacific ways of thinking and being to policies and programs within, alongside, and outside of state justice systems. So with all this in mind, today we have 4 exceptional scholars with us today, speaking about a range of Pacific criminological issues, including those leading the charge for a new Pacific criminology. So firstly, we'll have Mawalai Maimakoro from the University of Adelaide, and she's going to talk about whakananunanu, relational forms of order. Then Professor Miranda Forsyth and Michael Kabuni, both from the ANU, will give different perspectives of relational ways of managing criminal activity in the Papua New Guinean context. And then finally, Ngisa Moses-Faliolo from Te Heranga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington, will speak about his Marsden grant regarding what is next for the future of criminology. So they're going to speak for 15 minutes each, and then we're going to turn to the audience for questions. So I'd like to invite my mum.
So those who were here in the last panel, I was the child. Now I'm the elder. So Hakanananu Intokalau is really about reflections. And this is reflections about a research agenda that I'm currently working on. So I'm kind of posing this idea around relational order, relational security, and I'm just looking at it from this perspective. So I thought I'd start from here, because really it's around, law and order. I'm not a philosophy, but I found this. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, and I've got the experts of philosophies here. And but I think it's really this idea of fear that drives things. And I think also the idea that fear controls, that I'm kind of like questioning. So also around the security narratives, and we all know the direction of this, traditional, and then also the securitization agendas, and then also coming through with the security theories. With the security theories. I'm not going to go into detail about this, but it's just to kind of position really where I'm kind of coming from. Because all of these are around, the notion of order. So now we come to the idea of what is the international rules-based order. Everybody here I know are experts on this concept as well. And for me, this is not also my words, it is a contested concept. Lots of scholars have written about this. So there's different framings of it and the way that is kind of put forward. But for me, it's really about shape, control, and influence to maintain the status quo. And there are different perceptions of fear in the securitization threat. And I'm focusing on this notion because of the whole thing around the geopolitical framing that we are in at the moment. And within that intersection, how is the Pacific dealing with that? And I look at this notion of the intersection of security and development, and much of our leaders have talked about the security agenda is disrupting the development agenda. And one of the interesting things is that we all know the Boyd Declaration is our security framework in the region. But we also know there is a 2050 strategy around that. The thing about the Boyd Declaration we all know is that it gives the autonomy to sovereign countries to define their own securities. I'm not going to go into details with that, but it's very clear when you look at those documents that development priorities are also reflective in terms of the security priorities. So the idea of what is security, and also the idea also that there is no security is not there, it creates insecurity. So the flip side of the coin is forever present. And mutual contradictions is not even my word. This is a word also that comes out from the Pacific Theological College, and mainly also Upolu, that was here last year. Because the reality is, these things are always contradictions. What is security to one creates an insecurity to another. So what is the Pacific response to that notion of security? The international, the state-centric approach to security. So I'm posing this notion of relational order. This is also not a new idea. Miranda has done some great work in terms of relational policing. There's also the work that Sinclair has done. But I'm kind of putting it in a different perspective to kind of bring in the value of relationships as the underpinning form of order. In a different paper, I talked about relationships as the currency of influence. I've come to understand more. It's not just relationships for that. It's relationship is actually order. It's order. We are defined by the relationships in our interactions. Relationships in our context has protocols. And the protocols who you meet, the context defines how you relate to one another. So it's not visible, but you see how it works. It does work. So relational order here, I'm using again Professor Ubolu's words, is a whole of life consciousness. Because we can't separate anything. We are not compartmentalized. And then, I guess the application of that. So the Duaina Mulivaka is a Tokelauan saying, it's your elder. That's stability. That gives you the wisdom, that gives you the guide. And we heard from Professor Transform last night as well, this notion of tradition, of values that underpins this. So my grandfather, and I'm not posting, from Tokelau is a very, very well-respected fisherman. And one of the ideas that he was asked, the delegation from New Zealand came over to ask him about, education. And his response about education is that my home It's my first education. You just walk through my other classroom, my land. Everything I know how to deal with everything I learned from the land. The sea is the classroom I spend most of my time in to feed my family. Because in the concept also that Albert Went put forward is that the ocean reflects from the sky. So for us, ideas of power is multidimensional, because it is. It is multidimensional. There are so many different forms of power, and power is not even for one. We understand politicians' role. You have a prime minister. There's a role. It doesn't necessarily mean they have the power. Even within our own chiefs, this system. Fiona talked about it last year, 2022. You're just a custodian of your family. The family owns everything. And also the family, it's a consultation process to arrive at things. That's the value system that I'm saying secures. That's the first form of security. So I've also kind of put that thing up, because in this context of come with us, we'll influence you, we'll protect you, nobody can do that for us. Our history has told us that. And that's why solidarity, again, remains there. So some of the things around mutual emergence is the application of that. And this is our story. We talk about Levar. It's a negotiated space. There's a lot of work around that. Some of those as well is around the Pacific Inaugural Agreement. That's relationships. That's practical application. It's not something that sits outside of us. That agreement is relational. Blue Pacific is here. That is relational. It is an accepted concept. And there's also a case in Samoa whereby some chiefs took cases to the ADB because of land reforms they tried to implement in Samoa. They won the case. All these things are not highfalutin ideas. And we have our own research methodologies. And then come out of this university is the Oceania diplomacy. That is relationality. So I conclude with the notion of ho'oponopono. This is not my word. This is from the great Manulangi Meya. It's really about one in the many and the many in the one. Because for us individuals, it's not a thing. Collective, communal, it's definitely it. I'm exploring the concept of the sweetness of he lava. It's a concept that came out of Aisake Casimira, the ecological framework that Professor Transform referred to last night. It's the ethics of Pacific values, and it's actually also documented. But he lava, it's a Rotuman idea of the two sins, that when you mix together, it brings the sweet smell. And so my cultural advisors, the people that have really been the experts in all of these, are the community people. And I will finish again, because there's a lot of skepticism when we talk about our values. Thank you.
Thanks. So my research is around global regimes, global governance regimes, and how local institutions, local dynamics shape its impact and implementation. And for my PhD topic, I'm looking at the anti-money laundering regimes. So one of the things about the Pacific is that most of these regimes, the Pacific does not participate in, but they are expected to implement. And anti-money laundering regime is one of these. Some, like climate change, the Pacific has a much bigger voice. But when it comes to things like anti-money laundering regimes, none of the Pacific Island countries, in fact, not many countries in the world actually participated in the regime construction itself. It was the G7 idea. But then one of the interesting things about the anti-money laundering regimes around the world is that the adoption. There are about 205 countries at the moment that have subscribed to the standards set by Financial Agency Task Force, the big body that sets the rules. And there's really no convincing argument that these anti-money laundering regimes, if you adopt and implement, that it will prevent money from being laundered. In fact, some countries with the most developed, regimes are also the destinations of money laundering. And the concept is that the more developed your system, the cleaner the money becomes. Because the idea is to put in dirty money and then you get a clean money, all right? So it gives that impression that it's the proceed of a legitimate business activity. So Australia has been referred to as the Cayman Islands of the Pacific. I have reservations to that because part of the research is I deal with the definitions. And if you look at the strict definitions, it's not, because for money laundering to be an illegal proceed, it has to be proceed of a crime. The problem is that you have to define that crime under PNG laws for it to become crime, so that the proceed, when invested in Australia, it's money laundering, right? If money is taken out of PNG and you cannot define that as crime, then it's not money laundering per se, right? But anyway, so Australia's become this destination, Australia, Hong Kong, and Singapore for the last, Now, the interesting thing about PNG is that in the last decade, money didn't leave PNG. The money was laundered within PNG. And that's because of forex rationing. For you to take money out, you have to take it out in, let's say, US dollars. And PNG in the last decade had a very big problem with foreign currency. So one of the things that came out, that is coming out in my research, is that there are one of the lawyers I was speaking to, and it's a very established law firm, and they were complaining about pop-up law firms. So you would have a law graduate coming out from UPNG, and there are requirements around, you have to meet certain requirements to set up a law firm, and just comes out from UPNG and sets up a law firm. You have to have at least minimum 1 million. Right? You don't get that coming out from a law school in UPNG. So the question becomes, where these law students, right, getting the money to set up a law firm? My speculation is it's coming from the politicians. and there's a lot of things to talk about. I don't have the time. There is a funding mechanism in PNG called Constituency Development Funding. That's the name, but in PNG we call it District Services Improvement Program Fund or Provincial Services Improvement Program Fund. The Member of Parliament has 10 million to spend at its discretion and almost with zero acquittals. Now, the banks are stepping up so that it's becoming a bit more difficult to put your money directly into the banks. So now they're going through law firms. The banks don't question the law firm, all right, because they're supposed to do their due diligence. So you have these pop-up law firms everywhere. Real estate is becoming a big thing. And there are some very serious cases going on at the moment involving law firms and money laundering. Okay, so who are the drivers of these legislations, policies? So I put up a few up here. Financial Agency Task Force is the main one. If you don't subscribe to their 49 standards, the maximum, well, it's not a penalty. It's an evaluation, but they would class you as either gray listed country or blacklist. Well, they don't use the terms. But what happens is that if you're gray listed or blacklisted, that's the worst one, businesses stop doing business, conducting business with you. Corresponding banks withdraw services. So this is happening in the Pacific, but for a different reason, because it's not profitable. Some of the corresponding banks are withdrawing their services. China is trying to come in. And I think at the Pacific Forum level, United States is trying to sign this memorandum of understanding so that they put in banks, United States banks, or at least Australian banks, to perform these services, whilst others are pulling out. So that, geopolitics brings some benefit like this. So that's one. The donor countries, multilateral organizations like World Bank, IMF, so they've also adopted these FATF standards, Financial Agency Task Force standards. And the loan they give out is sometimes tied to conditions of you subscribing to these standards. So what's happening in developing countries, at least for PNG's sake, is that they adopt this so they could access the funding, not necessarily trying to make the thing work. And the result is, so I'll probably come back to this. So the result is this. It's really, so the FATF changed their evaluation method from just technical compliance, which is you implementing all the 49 standards, to results. So results, they're looking at 11 criteria. So you can see PNG scored 0 on all 11. And part of my argument is that because PNG is really not interested in fighting crime, they adopt this because they need to meet the technical requirements so that they can access IMF and World Bank funding. And a good example of this is that IMF gave some money to PNG 2 years ago with a condition that they establish ICAC, which is Independent Commission Against Corruption. This thing started when I was a baby. It only got implemented when IMF put it as a condition, right? And our prime minister, tries to write on this and say, "Oh, I'm trying to fight corruption, and I've passed these laws." But evidence is that without IMF, this wouldn't have gotten passed. So it's the condition. So drivers are almost external, every one of them. PNG does this because it has to access certain funding. It has to stay outside of the gray list and blacklist. And corresponding banks are playing a big role in this. So, for instance, the biggest bank in PNG is the Bank South Pacific. The corresponding bank is Wells and Fargo. It's a United States bank. The United States bank puts pressure on Wells and Fargo. Wells and Fargo then puts pressure on BSP to subscribe to these standards. So all the drivers for these regimes are external, at least meaningful drivers. Because when I spoke to the banks really don't care about a government. But when the corresponding bank asks for a report, they would submit it. All right? Because if they don't, corresponding bank would cut the relationship with the domestic banks, then it becomes difficult for them to, international trade or international transactions. So I needed to come back to this because PNG is one of the most comprehensive laws. Money laundering is understood, the conventional understanding of money laundering is that a crime is committed, the attempt to conceal the proceed of that crime, funds from that crime, right? That's money laundering, and trying to give an attempt to give it a legitimate, proceed. in Papua New Guinea's case, the moment you commit a crime, and it does not have to be money, that criminal property is money laundering. So they went to the very start, and it became very interesting with a case some of you may have heard of. Cocaine begins somewhere in South, was it Chile? Yeah, okay, so Henrietta knows more about this than me. And then comes to PNG, the market is Australia. It's 7 times more profitable than United States, cocaine, in Australia. So 600 kilograms of cocaine enters Papua New Guinea because the borders are weak. That's the easiest way to get it into PNG and get it down to Australia. The plane carrying 600 kg of cocaine then crashes before it attempting to lift, it crashes. So it was reported as drug bust. It wasn't really a drug bust. It was a plane crash. And so then what happened was the Drug Act of PNG was outdated by more than, half a century. So it was passed in 1952. And the highest penalty for that, for drug-related crime, was 2 years. And you had 600 kg of cocaine on your hands. So how are you going to deal with that? Now, they couldn't charge this guy under Drug Act because then for 600 kilograms of cocaine, he would have been sentenced to 2 years. So they used the money laundering law, all right? And that's not money, it's drug. But because in Papua New Guinea's legislations, any proceed of a criminal act is considered laundering or money laundering, all right? They charge him under money laundering. Yeah, the agreement was you give me more time, I share some of the proceeds of the crime with you. So he was charged under that, and he's serving 26 years. So money laundering regimes in Papua New Guinea have become one of the many tools that authorities use, all right? And it's not limited to money laundering. So it can be drug, it can be corruption, it can be anything. All right, and one of the main issues with Papua New Guinea is resourcing. So you have like 5 experts within the financial intelligence unit. They've got 27 staff in total, but 5 are the experts, and they are supposed to monitor 116 non-designated, non-financial and business professionals. So this is the law firms that I was talking about, right? The balloon law firms. So you have a lot of law firms, money exchanges, accounting firms, and you got 78 financial institutions. And one of the interesting things about financial institutions was that at the top level, the top tier banks like the BSPs and Kina Bank and Westpac and ANZ, it's relatively well monitored because that's where the focus is. So the crime is actually going down to the smaller banks. So they call them the microfinance banks. And I was speaking to microfinance banking guys, and they're breaking all the laws under the sun, right? Because these MPs cannot put money into the big banks because they've got relatively stronger mechanisms to monitor that. So they're putting money into the smaller banks. So for this, just one thing I should mention is Fiji is interesting. I know Jope doesn't think anything is working in Fiji. But there are 48 successful convictions, which is interesting, compared to Papua New Guinea's 4 convictions. And they all began around the same time, all right, adopting this legislation. So it's interesting that, and we can talk about this, why Fiji has more, conviction rate than PNG during the question and answer session. The Parauka Gate, I've got 2 minutes. This is a classical money laundering case. 162 million PNG kina was stolen from the National PES, the finance department. It flitted through 7 different law firms and then came back to this guy, Paul Paraka's law firm. They couldn't charge this case under, this is a classical money laundering case, and this is the type of case that you would expect PNG integrity agencies to investigate and prosecute, not the drug case that I was referring to. But they didn't charge this guy under money laundering. So that's an interesting dimension why they didn't. And I mean, coming back to my point, I don't think these laws are adopted to make it work, because this is a classical money laundering case. It would have made a really good statistics to our 4 successful prosecutions, but they never did. The guy was charged under a different crime, misappropriation, which is not money laundering. So why is it not working? There are many reasons. My firm belief is political will and political interference. There is a case called Coim vs. O'Neill. This is a case where a warrant was issued to arrest Peter O'Neill, our former prime minister. He disbanded this task force that went after him. He replaced the police commissioner, and that new police commissioner then brought in a lawyer that was supposed to act on behalf of the police, and then that lawyer dropped all the charges. So at the very top, it's political will, but it's also political interference, because the main source of money laundering in Papua New Guinea would be corruption. And if you talk about corruption, you're talking about politicians. All right. And all the top head of integrity agencies are political appointees. And what I mean by that is politicians are the chairs of the different appointment and the boards. So, yeah, I'll probably stop here, and then we can talk more about this during question time. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Henrietta for convening this panel, and to Moses for his continued leadership of the push for a Pacific criminology. So he's really just shown such great passion, bringing people together, in many different forums now. It's wonderful to be part of. And thank you, of course, to Professor Braithwaite too for being one of the forefathers of this idea. So I'm going to be talking about a project of mapping non-state and hybrid justice systems in Papua New Guinea. So I want to start by showing you a little bit about what this project is so far, and then I'll explain the rationale for the project, talk a little bit about the project design, some key initial findings. And I wanted just to mention some of the photos that I'm using here, which were taken by a colleague of mine, Anton Lutz, at the Enga show this year. And I wanted to use them because I think that they illustrate so much of what I love about local, hybrid, customary, and local justice institutions, where they bring together so many different elements and combine them in these very creative ways that I just constantly marvel at. So that's why I'm using these photos. So first of all, I wanted to show you what the project looks like so far. Yes, okay. So the idea is that I'm trying to map as many as possible of these very local justice institutions on Google Maps. So if you see, we can, with Google Maps, with Google Earth, you can actually go in a very detailed way to understand the terrain of the place that you're talking about. And I think that it brings into really high resolution, the lack, I suppose, of the state and the important role that the local plays in addressing conflict and providing justice. So what we've tried to do is to map, as you can see, like little bits of information about these different systems. So for example, here we've got, sorry, there's two different screens here, and so it's very hard to move between them. You can see, anyway, this particular institution, which is called Village Elder or Leader, and the types of cases that it hears and the types of decision makers. If I compare that, for example, with a different one here, you can see, this is called community peace mediation. The types of cases it hears are slightly different. The sources of law, custom and biblical principles, and the types of remedies that are available. So there's this real focus on restoring peace and harmony in the community. Another example, sorry, I can't. Okay, this is another example, the Kunai Committee, which deals with minor cases like disputes among the community members. And again, they're using custom biblical principles and also state law, and they use more of a mediation approach. So if I go back, go back to the presentation. How do I get back on the screen?
If you just press that.
Ah. Okay, so the rationale for the project is really that conflict resolution in Papua New Guinea and in fact across the Pacific really happens in the family and also in the community. And it's only about 10 to 20% of cases really that get to the state level. And yet it's at the state level that most of the attention of donors and of state institutions really focus. So I thought, important to think about what happens underneath that level of the state. And I wanted to know more about these customary and local institutions in Papua New Guinea for a number of reasons. So I think it's really necessary to test some of the assumptions that there are about non-state systems. So we often hear that they exclude women, that they exclude youth, that they are abusive of human rights, and that compensation is used in ways that is really problematic. And so I wanted to find out more in order to test some of those assumptions, to understand also what are some of the friction points that exist between these local level justice institutions and the state. Or conversely, what are the points in which there is a lovely symbiotic relationship? I wanted to understand how we can provide better pathways to justice, understanding that justice means many different things to different people, and people are looking for different responses. And then also really importantly, from other research that I've been doing, it's clear that these justice institutions at the local level are very necessary in order to stop conflict from getting out of control. So many of the big conflicts that we've been seeing in Papua New Guinea recently, they often stem from very small disputes that then are not addressed properly, and then they escalate and they escalate and they escalate. And then by the time the state gets involved, it's really too late, and you have the sort of destruction of property like we see in the photo I've got there. So I wanted to try to understand, okay, what are these customary local institutions that exist below the level of the state? And I started asking people about them, and I was overwhelmed by the diversity of the institutions that exist. So there's the One Bell Court, Family Elders, Clans Heavy Committee, Law and Order Committee, Prayer Warrior Team, Amamas Court, Win-Win Court, Peace Mediation Committee, Houseman Talk, Village Committee, Guilt Finding Ritual. It goes on and on and on. So, how to approach this, how to try to understand it as a phenomenon. I thought maybe mapping it in the way that I have started to do might be a way of starting to understand what are some of the differences in these systems as they exist across Papua New Guinea, and also what are some of the similarities. So talking a little bit then about the project design. So it's clear that I wanted to focus on different justice and conflict management institutions throughout Papua New Guinea that exist outside of the state, but I also realised that there are no clear divisions between state and non-state in Papua New Guinea. There's always this kind of really interesting intersection and between the two of them. So that's why it's non-state and hybrid system. I found that calling them formal or informal didn't really work because often some of these systems can be quite formal, and they can also incorporate bits of the state justice institutions. So in terms of the sources of data that I tried to use, so first of all, obviously the scholarly and the grey literature, but there wasn't a lot of that. And so I developed a form that I got students at Divine Word University to take back to their home provinces when they went home for their Christmas break and to fill out. We piloted the form, and then finally we've managed to get 53 entries filled out so far. So it's an ongoing data collection project. The question really starts, the form really starts by asking people, when there's a problem in the community, where do people go to first? And I want you to describe that institution. And then we've got a whole lot of questions around, how to describe it. And then also ask them things like, can you please attend one of these cases and make your observations? So we try to have both a general description and then also a more detailed example of how it worked in practice. So just to take you through a few of the key insights. First of all, there is just like an amazing diversity of justice institutions which generally involve combinations of church, custom, bits of state. And it seems that in most places where one of those is effective for one reason or another, then it tends to be able to become the central node and then to attract others to come and to join it. And that then ends up influencing overall whether or not it has more of a propensity towards Christian approaches towards mediation, for example, or towards dealing with cases in a more state-like way, or to dealing with cases in a more customary way. They deal with a wide variety of cases. I haven't been able to find any really clear pattern of that. And also the processes can take a really long time to be finally resolved, like years, or sometimes they can be resolved very quickly. I found that compensation is a major component in how many cases are resolved, and many people expressed satisfaction with how that happened. But also there was a lot of oratory about the need to live well together. So that those two things combined seem to be the major way in which cases were resolved. And I found that often fees are charged to hear cases in ways that can be quite exclusionary of people trying to seek access to justice. In terms of the voice and the role of women, I found that in many areas women are decision makers. So this quote that I put up there, in the past, men were the only ones who have the authority or power to handle court hearings and make decisions without allowing the women to speak. However, today this has changed. We can see there are women who are part of the court hearing and peace mediation team that listen to court hearings for the purposes of equality. And there was a reasonable proportion of cases of institutions in which women do play a role, but there was also definitely institutions where women are excluded and where patriarchy is still really clear. So, for example, in this one institution, I was told the decision makers got their positions through marrying more than 5 wives. So in contrast, I would say to what there has been improvement in terms of inclusion of women's voices, it seems like there's still a long way to go when it comes to inclusion of the voices of youth. So in general, the youth could talk, and youth is understood as a very broad category. I am no longer considered to be a youth, apparently, but it seems like I've only recently graduated from that position. So young people can speak if they're a witness or a defendant or a complainant, but otherwise they are expected to be largely uninvolved in the process. And people often said as well, you know, our youth, they have got the right to speak, but sometimes they choose not to as well. And then finally, in terms of the relationship with the state, there appear to be well-established pathways to transfer cases between this local institution and the state in many places. But there is this fairly repeated and constant desire for there to be more support from the state, and in particular, backup from police. That's really just a theme that I've been hearing throughout Papua New Guinea, but also recently on a trip to Solomon Islands, we heard the same thing, that community leaders are saying, you know, we're doing our work, but we really need to be able to call on the police sometimes when we know that if they don't act, things are just going to get out of control. So thank you very much.
Can I just get everybody to stand up for a second, please? Stand up. Just turn to the person next to you and shake his hand and say hello, g'day, what's up?
Hello, hello.
That's better. All right, so I need a clicker, please, Chief.
You'll have to click kind of near
Near here?
in that direction.
In this, like there? It's too far already. How's that? I'm not one of these presenters that likes to be anchored in one spot. I like to move around. So the future of Pacific Criminology has changed. And I'll just say that right from the start. I wonder if I can, yeah, here we go. All right, so. Talofa lava malo lei whakalofa lai atu ni Sambolo Vanaka kona Māori hola leketa taloha ni whakatalofa kia orana tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Yeah, my name is Moses. I'm going to hopefully walk you through just a really quick overview about Pacific Criminology. I don't really want to go into too much detail about that, other than just to give you some sort of glimpses into what we're thinking about as a team going forward, since some of the achievements already achieved already so far. But firstly, before we do that, I think it's important that you stop and just acknowledge a few things, a few people, organisations. Si e viinga lea tua, mo leni aso mātango fie. Le aso na whaia lea tua, ina tātou oli iai, ma fia iai. So, before I go through and acknowledge the rest of my list there, just a little bit of warning. You're going to find yourself a little bit uncomfortable, because a lot of the things that I'm going to present to you is going to maybe sort of irk you, because you won't even understand what I'm saying. And that's intentional, because Pacific, this is how we do it, right? And so when I say this is how we do it, for decades, a lot of us Pacificans have navigated in and out of Western diaspora, right? So I've got 12 minutes to try and attempt our non-Pacificans to navigate in and out of Pacifica diaspora. All right, so here we go. I also want to acknowledge the Aboriginal people, the Indigenous people, and the custodians, the elders, past, present, and the future. Thank you for hosting me, as well as thanking the hosts of Australia National University and the Department of Pacific Affairs for my travel, accommodation, and just for also looking after my well-being. Thank you, Henrietta McNeill, for inviting me to be part of this awesome presentation and panel discussion. Also want to acknowledge my mum and dad, Le'aula Mose Lota Faleolo. He migrated out of Samoa, arrived in New Zealand about 68, I think it was, 63. Had a lot of jobs. Then he met my mum, Pepe Fatunai Faleolo, and they met actually in an English speaking class in South Auckland. None of them knew how to speak English. But they met and they fell in love and they got married, and I was born in 69. So Dad was a factory worker for 57 years. All he did was pack plastic cups in a box, and that's what he did. Mum, she was a homemaker, a mum for nearly a couple of decades, probably a quarter of a century, 25 years plus, and then she moved into retail, and from retail she moved into early childhood, and then from early childhood she moved into justice of the peace, and then she also finished off by becoming a lay advocate in the Department for Courts in New Zealand. Not bad for two people who didn't know how to speak English when they first arrived in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Mum also picked up a Bachelor of Education degree. So I just want to acknowledge my parents. I also want to acknowledge this man here. Distinguished Professor John Braithwaite, right here. Really because Pacific Criminology wouldn't exist really without this guy's speech in 2013. When then the I think it was Australian New Zealand Society of Criminology was bestowing this guy here the distinguished scholar, criminological scholar, something like that, eh? Something like that. And he gave this paper a retrospective on the Pacific. And he challenged Anzoc that it's about time you did something about forging a pathway for Pacific criminology to emerge and to become a force. So 2013, and then I met my sister here, Miranda, in when was it, 2020, something like that. And without Miranda, I don't think it would have been possible to actually achieve having the first symposium in 2022, and then now the publication in 2024. In Pacifica, we acknowledge people first and foremost, right? In the Pacific, we acknowledge people. Polynesians, Melanesians, and Micronesians, first and foremost, greet the Heavenly Almighty. Let's not forget our roots, people, right? And then we move on to acknowledging who have been important people in our pathway to where we stand right now, right? So I probably wasted, 5 minutes doing that? So there's my PhD, came out in 2015. I'm a gang researcher. That's what I do. I've been a gang researcher for nearly 20 years. And when this PhD came out, what I was looking for was something to describe why the gangs I was examining and exploring were using a cultural process or ceremony or rituals as part of their gang activities. Some of them were saying the prayer before they even went out to have a fight. Some of them were actually sitting around in a circle, fundraising, passing around an envelope and an empty box to put in food and things like that, because they're going to get ready to visit one of their friends in hospital. These are the sort of things that you don't really read about or hear about, really. And yet it's fascinating to me, because these are the kind of cultural stuff that I'm really into. But more importantly, I think it needs to be told, right? It needs to be brought out. So I was looking for a term that describes, so I can bundle everything that I was looking at and then came across in my findings. And that's where I came across Pacific Criminology. And that led me to my relationship that I have with my sister here, Professor Miranda Forsyth, who we got together, and she's the one, she said to me, let's have a symposium. So I was like, oh, no, that's a lot of work. But we got there, didn't we? We got there because the Pacific Criminological Collective was huge. You know, we had people from 8 universities from the region come through collectively, help us, support us financially, and resource us in order to achieve the very first symposium. And what I got there, lastly, and then you can see at the bottom there, 2024, the publication. Yeah, look, we've got Sinclair here, who's one of our contributing authors, myself, Miranda, and a few others if I've missed anybody here. But I tell you what, there's a woman in our audience that I wanted to acknowledge, and that's Felicity Tepper. She's sitting right there in the black cardigan. She was immense. She was the one really that put the collection together. Can you imagine hours and hours and hours of editing, first drafts, second drafts, pieces of work. So, you know, thank you, Felicity, for that. That was huge, what you did for us. And again, you know, as the Pacific way is that we acknowledge those people who have been responsible for getting us where we are. Let's not forget that, Pacific people. There are Pacific people in here, all right? And the other reason why I walk around is because, I don't know, Pacific people like to do things differently. That's what I've been believed to be, or the way I've been brought up, you know, because standing behind here is very Western to me, all right? But, you know, I came from a background of white Sunday, you know, Sunday school dances and, and so forth. But anyway, I'm thinking I'm veering off the topic. I've already had a sign here, 5 minutes. Get on with it. All right, I will. I was going to sing you the song, but I cannot now. I can't now because I ran out of time. But the reason being is because I wanted to sing the song so then you can take in the nuance and the tune. You won't understand what the words mean, but you've at least had a glimpse, if not a little bit of an immersion into Pacific spiritual life, right? Because I can probably imagine everybody in this room has never been into a Pacific church, a Samoan church, Tongan church, Cook Island church, Papua New Guinea church, etc., etc., etc. I don't think so, right? I could be wrong, right? So can't do that today, coming out of your comfort zone. Damn, another presentation maybe. I was going to do this as well. This is a beautiful poem that our authors who wrote the epilogue of our publication, Associate Professor Thomas Ela Soali Saoni and Tuivalu Lua Tuivalu, one of our PhD candidates, was mainly Shiselo that wrote this. And I was going to get us to go through, close our eyes while I recite this to you and imagine what the Pacific beaches, the sands, the blueness of the ocean, etc., etc., etc. And again, attempt to try and immerse you into the world of Pacific diaspora. I can't do that. So, and I was also going to attempt to try and walk you through a particular theory. And this is not a theory. This is really a concept that's just been borrowed from pre-missionary times. The missionaries arrived in the shores and out in Samoa and in the Pacific, and they colonized us, brother. They overhauled our religious and our spiritual realities and our beliefs. And so me and a few others have had to go back in time to pull out something that's specific, that could speak to what or how crime has been caused, and also how to respond to it at the same time using the same lens. And that's Pacific Criminology, folks, right then and there. And so I don't have time to go walk you through that. Damn. And here, it's just a real summary. Pacific Criminology, in the blue really are the key points. It's really going to ask our non-Pacific researchers to think alternatively. I know you're all used to your Western theories and your constructs and your methodologies and your ideas. To study Pacific phenomenon, you may need to probably integrate that with Pacific theories and methods and also other approaches. But that's going to require you to think alternatively. But what are you thinking alternatively be about? Well, the concept of Samoa. Well, I don't know anything about that. Well, then it's up to us to go back and re-educate ourselves about these Pacific ways of thinking and our Pacific ways of doing things. What does it say here? Yeah, because the cultural lens helps us to dig further into truths. I've got a chapter in that new publication that's come out, and I've called it Samoa Criminology. It's something that I know that Professor Braithwaite, in his wisdom and when he was forecasting what it could look like, I'm talking about. So I use an interview excerpt between myself and a gang member. And then I present what a Western analysis would reveal. And then later on in my paragraphs, I present what a Samoa analysis would reveal. And you would see that there is two contrasting analysis or findings and discussion. And that's my point, right? So I want to finish up by this. I don't have much time to go on further about these things behind me. But there is the short-term, medium-term, and long-term goals in terms of what the future of Pacific Criminology could look like. I'm in the middle of writing a book. It's all about Pacific Criminology, but I'm using gang life histories to inform that piece. That's due next year, in September, hopefully, God willing. Miranda and I we're going to engage with. We're engaging with the Pacific Criminology Collective, and through that relationship, we've got hopefully National University of Samoa will host the second symposium on their shores, and so those are the more sort of the ones that are coming up. But behind me, they're not in any order. Our own journal, our own policy and research unit, our own faculty. You know, we want Pacific Criminology taught in South Pacific, in Oceania, or in the Pacific. We want a lot of things, right? But it started from this guy, and it's now passed on. He's passed it on to us. And we need to do what we can do in the space of time that we have this responsibility for before we pass it on to you and also those students that we're moulding, like you, Henrietta, like we're moulding, and Michael, that we're moulding in the background. But yeah, look, I've run out of time, so thank you for listening to me. Before I finish off, it's also customary that I do a short tatalo, so just bear with me, which means prayer. Just bear with me, all right? Tātou ifo mā tatalo le tua, le tuaira mā tō te mā le langi. Ia o le whaiunga lo presentation. Ai, le me whainga ngā lo lofa. Ma lo anga lei. Whaftai mo le maalosi. Ngai fuhai me ia o ngi aso. Ngi whamatalanga. Ni folanga ma folanga. Le o swafa le o la utataro le tawar. Swafa tama ma le alo manganga pa ia. Amen. Thank you, people.
Thank you. That was amazing, all presenters. We've got a little bit of time for questions, probably about 15 minutes. And so I acknowledge that one of our presenters is unable to answer any questions, but if you have any for her, I can always take note of them and get back to you. But for the three presenters here, who would like to ask the first question? Judy.
Hi, I've got two questions. The first one was for Michael. I know the three ICAC commissioners are Australian, I believe, and I just wondered if you want to comment on appointing outsiders to the PNG ICAC, given what you were saying about the politics and the politicians' role in not really wanting money laundering to be addressed. And a question for Miranda. Been doing research with some women colleagues. I don't think any of them are here, but we've been looking at women's safety in 5 different countries in the Pacific Island country region, and that's about the meanings of safety and what they do to try and protect themselves. But a critical issue across the 5 countries was the online environment. So I'm wondering about these local justice activities, I guess, in a way, and how they're incorporating knowledge and understanding of the online environment. It seems to be an increasing, I don't know how much of that's inflamed by certain cases, but the fact that it seemed to apply across the 5 countries I thought was really important.
Yeah, so the advantage is that they're not connected to what we call one-talk system in PNG, which is a really big cause why some of these cases don't proceed. So one-talk system it's one-talk system. so yeah, people live in tribes and clans and communities, and when someone within your own community or your own one-talk, one language or province has committed a crime and you report that, and the police commission or the investigator is from the same area, usually that case doesn't proceed. And it's a cultural practice, and now it's gone into modern systems. So the argument for having foreign commissioners, 2 Australians and 1 New Zealander, and even at the executive level, most of them are foreign, is because they don't have connections to these tribes and clans and communities. So they're independent and they would proceed. The opportunity cost for that is that they don't know what they're doing. In a country, so you have 3 commissioners. There was an opportunity to have 2 foreign and 1 national. It's not because we don't have good public servants. There are some very competent fraud squad members who have been sidelined and fired by the previous government because they did a really good job. And those guys are around. So one of them could have been appointed as one of the commissioners. He brings the local knowledge. Prosecuting crime and corruption in PNG is very complex. He would know what to do. So that's the thing. They wanted to remove one-talk system, but ended up with commissioners that are operating in an environment that they are not familiar with. A really good example of how a foreign appointee can be very effective is a judge called Berrigan. So the case I was referring to was 10 years in the making, went before different Papua New Guinea judges, didn't proceed. Came to this judge, an Australian who has been in the country for 20 years. So she was foreign judge, but she knew exactly what she was doing and all the intricacies. So it's not just appointing a foreign, public servant or official, but someone probably has been in the country long enough and knows how things work.
Thanks for the question, Judy. And that's coming up in my research as well, this issue of online usage. Only one of the surveys that I got back specifically mentioned that as a type of case that they address. And that actually surprised me that even in that one specifically identified it. But gossip is a very common category for these institutions to deal with. So I imagine if we delve deeper that they would be adapting and also incorporating, how gossip occurs online. Yeah. But I think that's a really promising area for more research.
Thank you very much to the panelists. I think my question is just around relationality, which I think Maima had spoken to, but more specifically for Professor Miranda and Dr. Moses. I was curious about the oratory you mentioned, the oratorical content. If you could articulate some of the things that sort of speaks to that in terms of what you had mentioned about bringing people together. I'm just curious about it, considering Maima's presentation on relationality and the interconnections and how these kind of things are sort of new within broader context of research. But that really captured me, and I wanted to sort of hear more about that, or curious about that. For Dr. Moses, is just when you talked about the gangs having sort of prayer meetings or things before going out to do certain things, I wonder to what extent is that, would you see it as a reconstituted notion of indigeneity in diaspora? Is it something that is connected to being disconnected from your home, from the culture, from within the islands, or is it sort of reconstituted in a certain way to rebuild what most often there's a tendency to rebuild things that is perceived to have lost in terms of indigenous identity? Is that something that's very prominent in rebuilding collective identities, or is it sort of just repeating or sort of performing what you have as an idea of what culture is back home, if it's a diaspora thing? Just those two questions. Thank you.
Look, the gangs, look, I spent 18 months on the field, you see, and I think that's key. 6 to 7 months of that time was just me and being allowed to hang out with them and watch and observe things. There are things which I couldn't be watching, but and eating with them and drinking with them and just, telling stories and things like that, childhood stuff and superheroes and that kind of stuff. I think that was really key. There was a second set of gang members, though. There I had to talk a lot and using my own language. There were some moments as well where we were talking about the homeland. And these were the more, obviously the more older gang members. The youngest was 16 and the oldest was 65. And there were 50 life histories that were collected. They covered the whole life course. And so to build relationships with the older group was very different. There were lots of differences there, but one of the biggest differences was around the fact that I'm born in New Zealand and wasn't born in the Pacific. And that was quite clear. And that came across pretty hard to accept, but it is part and parcel of the whole research experience. How we got around that, for example, so I would, talk about some of the things my mum and dad shared with me, which they could reconnect back to the islands. And I would also say it in a way like, for example, 2 or 3 of these gang members were also matai. They had titles. So because I'm a matai, I spoke in using lineage and using whakapapa. Lineage, so tracing back the ancestral ties of their title way back 3 or 4 before generations, not lost. So they were amazed that I knew that knowledge. It was all rehearsed though, because I had to go back and talk to my own dad to get that knowledge and then memorize it before I could go back in there, you know. So, so the younger ones was pretty easy, you know, KFC, McDonald's, that sort of stuff. So I still haven't lost it. So, but the older ones was a bit more tricky, but got there. Kia ora.
Thanks. Yeah. It varies depending on place, right? But it is a sort of a general, I suppose, reference to the fact that everybody is of one community. You know, we are one bell together. We need to live together in harmony. Sometimes there's references to Christianity as part of that. And then at another level, there is often reference to the fact that, you know, particularly like these women could be your mothers. These are your aunties. You know, you've got to look after them. These are your sisters. That kind of relational response also came out that's come out in other research that I've done. Not so much the forms that I got back were more generalised, sort of, you know, where they're talking about the need for communities all to work together and so forth. But a lot of the work that I've done elsewise, it's, you know, just see these survivors of this kind of violence, these could be your mothers, and your duty is to protect them rather than to attack them. That kind of oratory.
Just to quickly add. So I was talking about my the PhD. So, and I've done 3 gang research projects since then. And so actually I found that the relationships are a lot easier to form because of the PhD. I put a lot of work into that. And so the subsequent research projects, the relationships are a little bit more seamless and a bit more fluid. I don't have to account, apart from when I'm travelling into different regions in New Zealand. So in Auckland, I'm well known, but in Wellington, they have no idea who I am. So I have to start all over again. So yeah, I just wanted to add further to that. Kia ora.
Braithwaite. Sorry, we'll just get the mic over to you.
Thank you. So Moses, is there a Samoan way that a Samoan gang forms a relationship with a non-Samoan gang?
The best example I could come up with for that one is the one time we were visiting a member who had been lying in hospital after having a fight with a rival gang, in which that particularly had, in fact, they were a white gang. So, and so after we came through out of that visit, we decided to go to visit the rival gang in South. So, I was pretty scared. I'm not going to lie, because I didn't want, this is going to look ugly in my view. But PBS, I'm going to name the gang, Pearl Baker Styles. They're all 100% Samoan members. They assured me that the visit to their pad was going to be peaceful, and there wasn't going to be any animosity or anything like that. The key to it was 2 or 3 of us went, or 2 or 3 of the PBS gang members went. The rest of us stayed behind in these 2 gang vans. So there was 2 of us, and I can see they were knocking on the door, and they gifted the. I could see the reaction of the white gang member, like, and the gift was a box of beers, 24, 12 stubbies, and a couple of packets of cigarettes. And that's the quick example I could think of right now. And then they were invited in, and everyone else in the van these vans were all restless, wondering, what's going on. 5 minutes later, 2 people came out, and we were all invited in. I think the process of mea lofa or mea sina in Samoan, we call it mea sina. In Te Ao Māori, it's called koha. I think that was a real deal breaker. I think that was the one that really minimized and broke through any kind of conflict or violent conflict whatsoever was being planned that day or whatever. And then because that played that key role, it enabled really good conversations, even to the point why that whole fight originated in the first place. And then there was a whole lot of bit of tears and quite an emotional moment being shared amongst the two rival gang factions. So I came away, obviously, that was pretty juicy in terms of research, but that's the first thing I can think of, Prof. Kia ora.
I think that's probably us for time, but I want to give a huge whakawhai te lava thank you to our panellists and thank you to the audience for showing up. Thank you.